generation ship does not need to explode to become a tragedy. That is the first thing one must understand. Popular imagination loves visible disaster because it flatters the eye. A hull rupture, a reactor fire, a collision in the dark, a grand mechanical scream followed by silence. These are easy horrors. They arrive with shape. They can be seen, counted, narrated. Deep space is cruel in quieter ways. A civilization sealed inside a vessel can remain intact in appearance while beginning, somewhere behind the visible routines of life, to come apart. The lights still turn on, the corridors are still walked, the children still attend lessons, the crops still rise in their trays. Yet a slow fracture has begun. This is what makes the idea of breakdown so frightening. In a world built on closed systems, decay is rarely local for long. A problem in the air recycler is not only an engineering problem. It becomes fatigue in the lungs, headaches at work, shortened tempers, crop stress, medical strain, political suspicion, changes in sleep, and the eventual recognition that the environment itself has started to betray the people it was meant to preserve. A contaminated water loop is not just a maintenance event, it is a moral event, because it means that the invisible covenant between society and survival has been damaged. A generation ship would therefore live under a permanent tension between normality and latent crisis. It would need to look like a world in order to remain psychologically inhabitable, while never ceasing to be a machine whose failures can spread through every part of life. This is the deepest terror of deep space. It is not simply that something might break. It is that a small and ordinary failure, left unresolved long enough, can grow until it reaches the scale of civilization itself. The first danger lies in slowness. On Earth, people are accustomed to systems that can fail locally while the larger world absorbs the damage. A district may lose power while the sky remains breathable and the ground remains stable. A city may suffer contamination while the wider biosphere still exists around it as a buffer, however strained. A ship offers no such generosity. It is all interior. Every loop closes back into the same finite world. For that reason, the most dangerous failures are often not the spectacular ones, but the ones that begin in a narrow technical corner and remain tolerable long enough to escape immediate panic. A filter clogs slightly faster than projected. A trace contaminant begins to rise, but only by increments. A pump vibrates with a frequency that does not yet require shutdown. A microbial imbalance appears in part of the water recovery chain. Crop yield falls by 3%, then 5%, then 7%. No single event compels full civic alarm. The ship keeps moving. Work continues. Meals are served. Children sleep. Yet the margin between stability and danger is being consumed silently, and once that margin has thinned enough, several ordinary weaknesses can meet one another and suddenly become something much harder to contain. This is why deep space breakdown would rarely resemble one dramatic mechanical betrayal. It would resemble weather inside a closed civilization, weather made of statistics, postponed repairs, human denial, and the dangerous comfort of still being able to say that everything is under control. The ship would begin to fail first in confidence, then in capacity, then finally in visible form. By the time the crisis becomes undeniable to everyone, it may already have been accumulating for years. Air would likely be the most intimate site of this fear because breathing is the one act no one can postpone. NASA has long treated environmental control and life support as central to human survival in space, and for a multi-generational vessel, the reliability of those systems would become indistinguishable from the continuity of society itself. The atmosphere aboard such a ship would not be a passive background. It would be manufactured, circulated, filtered, monitored, chemically balanced, and protected from toxic drift hour after hour for centuries. If that system began to degrade, the symptoms might at first appear trivial. A slight dryness in communal spaces, more irritation in the throat, more headaches among maintenance crews, slight cognitive slowing that could be mistaken for overwork, rising carbon dioxide in certain sectors that makes sleep less restorative and decision-making less precise. The ship's population may not immediately recognize atmospheric decline because no one experiences the atmosphere as a whole. People experience rooms, corridors, dormitories, farms, schools, workshops. The atmosphere becomes visible only when it has already started changing behavior. That is what makes air failure so sinister. It enters through the body before it announces itself as a public event. A civilization can argue about policy, religion, law, or purpose, but compromised air cuts beneath all those levels at once. It shortens attention, weakens trust, and turns daily life into a low-grade biological negotiation. If the ship's atmosphere begins to drift out of tolerable balance, breakdown ceases to be a technical matter handled in the engineering decks. It becomes something every citizen carries inside the bloodstream. Water contamination would be no less severe and perhaps even more politically explosive. On Earth, water can be lost, replaced, diluted, imported, purified in multiple large systems, or temporarily endured in its imperfection because there is still a wider hydrological world beyond the damaged network. A generation ship would not have that luxury. Water there would be memory in liquid form. It would return from breath, sweat, urine, agricultural runoff, condensation, and industrial loops. Every drop would be part of a closed conversation between life and its residue. If contamination entered that conversation, the problem would touch everything. At first, the signs might look small: strange taste, unusual mineral balance, more gastrointestinal illness in one sector, crop trays behaving unpredictably, filters reaching saturation faster than expected, certain reservoirs demanding more energy-intensive purification cycles. Then comes the social phase. Which district is receiving cleaner water? Which teams knew the problem earliest? Who decided not to announce it? Who gets priority access to safer reserves? In a closed world, contamination always migrates toward politics because scarcity clarifies value. There is also a psychological violence in drinking from a system no longer fully trusted. On a starship, water is not symbolic of life. It is life arranged by engineering. If people begin to fear that the loop itself has become compromised, then the ship loses one of the deepest invisibilities that makes civilization feel normal. Every cup becomes a question. Every communal meal becomes slightly charged. Every reassurance from command must work against the oldest instinct the species has, the refusal to swallow uncertainty. Power failure, when it comes slowly, may look at first like inconvenience rather than apocalypse. That is precisely why it is dangerous. A generation ship's reactors, batteries, storage banks, thermal systems, and load-balancing infrastructure would be expected to work not for years, but for eras. Even with excellent design, materials age, tolerances drift, shielding degrades, sensors misread, and the accumulated fatigue of constant operation begins to matter in ways no founding blueprint can perfectly predict. A reactor does not need to melt down to become threatening. It can become less efficient, less stable, more maintenance-hungry, less forgiving of fluctuations. When that happens, the ship enters a new civic mood. Power allocation stops feeling like administration and starts feeling like triage. Lighting schedules may tighten, recreational sectors may close earlier, agricultural systems may be reconfigured to conserve energy at the cost of variety, workshops may operate in narrower windows, environmental buffering may be reduced slightly in order to preserve core reserves. Each individual change can be rational. Together, they alter the emotional climate of the vessel. Citizens begin to feel that abundance has quietly withdrawn. This is how a ship can become poorer without suffering one decisive catastrophe. The reactors age, the buffer shrinks, the civilization learns to live with less flexibility. It remains alive, perhaps even orderly, but the future grows smaller because every watt has become morally visible. In deep space, an aging power system is not just a mechanical problem. It is a narrowing of possibility itself. Agriculture would expose the fragility of the whole arrangement with almost painful clarity. On Earth, famine may arise from drought, war, disease, soil exhaustion, trade failure, or political cruelty, but always against the background of a living planet whose overall biosphere remains vastly larger than the farm. On a generation ship, agriculture would exist inside a deliberately constructed ecology with almost no hidden reserves. Light, nutrients, pollination strategies, microbial health, water purity, atmospheric composition, thermal stability, and labor timing would all be part of the same disciplined machine. That means agricultural failure would not be one thing. It would be many small things discovering one another. Crop disease in one chamber, stress from altered humidity, seeds losing viability faster than expected, nutrient recycling loops becoming less reliable as equipment ages, a fungal bloom that survives one sterilization protocol and returns, a labor shortage that delays pruning or pollination. Lower yields might begin as a statistical irritation and end as a cultural trauma, because food aboard a ship is never just calories. It is rhythm, trust, memory, and proof that the world still works. The terrifying aspect is not merely hunger. It is that agriculture on a ship translates systemic weakness into something everyone can feel. Shorter menus, more monotonous meals, lower nutritional resilience, rising ration anxiety, arguments over allocation, and the loss of culinary pleasure all become signs that the vessel's invisible disciplines are slipping. The farm becomes a mirror in which civilization sees its own diminishing margin. The problem of replacement parts may prove more devastating than many grander dangers, because no ship can carry infinity in storage. Founders may pack vast inventories, build fabrication bays, teach maintenance cultures, and still remain trapped by one terrible fact. Over centuries, specialized failure accumulates faster than any original stockpile can comfortably predict. Seals become brittle, rare components crack, sensor arrays drift beyond repair, machine tools themselves wear out. The machines needed to replace parts acquire failures of their own. A civilization enclosed in one vessel must eventually learn to rebuild the means of rebuilding. This is where decline can become almost feudal in tone. Some materials grow precious. Some workshops become politically powerful because they alone can still produce critical tolerances. Salvage culture intensifies. Old sectors of the ship are cannibalized to keep more vital sectors alive. People begin to speak of certain machines the way earlier societies spoke of ancestral relics, not because they are holy, but because there is no practical way to replace them cleanly anymore. Maintenance becomes archaeology under pressure. A generation ship does not need to run out of everything to be in danger. It needs only to lose confidence that what breaks tomorrow can still be remade the day after. Once that belief begins to fail, every new fault carries more emotional weight. The ship stops feeling renewable and starts feeling mortal. Medicine in such a world would also change character under breakdown conditions. A healthy ship can sustain hospitals, surgery, pharmaceuticals, sterilization, dentistry, reproductive care, rehabilitation, and psychological support in a reasonably stable way, provided enough knowledge and materials remain. A failing ship begins to treat medicine as another contested reserve. Sterile fields become harder to guarantee if water quality shifts. Medical imaging may become harder to maintain if sensors or power systems degrade. Certain drugs expire without reliable replacement pathways. Preventive care shrinks because labor must be redirected elsewhere. This is one of the most cruel consequences of slow collapse. The ship may remain good enough to preserve most people most days while becoming steadily worse at dealing with the unlucky, the chronically ill, the injured, the old, the pregnant, or the psychologically exhausted. Healthcare narrows toward urgency. Long-term dignity becomes harder to protect. The civilization continues, but the definition of what counts as acceptable suffering expands against its own moral instincts. That expansion can scar a society deeply. People remember when the infirmary had more light, more staff, more medicines, more confidence. Children grow up under a harsher baseline and do not know what has been lost. The ship still has doctors, but medicine begins to feel less like an institution of care and more like the management of narrowing possibilities. In deep space, That shift could become one of the clearest signs that a technical failure has already become civilizational. Under those pressures, politics would harden. A healthy generation ship would already need governance subtle enough to balance survival and liberty. A failing one may discover how quickly fear justifies concentration of power. Rationing boards become emergency councils. Emergency councils become semi-permanent authorities. Technical expertise becomes political authority because citizens cannot easily distinguish one from the other when every systems report sounds like a verdict. Transparency may shrink in the name of morale. Dissent may be treated as sabotage. People begin to live not only under engineering necessity, but under the interpretation of necessity by those nearest the controls. Some of this may be unavoidable. A society facing atmospheric decline, water contamination, failing reactors, and shrinking agricultural margin cannot govern itself as though it were a leisurely republic insulated by abundance. Decisions must be made quickly, and the wrong ones can kill. Yet necessity does not erase danger. A population trapped inside a single vessel has almost nowhere to send its suspicion. If trust in command erodes while systems continue to degrade, the result may be more frightening than simple dictatorship. It may be a society in which everyone knows cooperation is essential and no one fully believes the terms under which cooperation is being demanded. That is when breakdown becomes cultural as much as mechanical. The ship still has laws, councils, engineers, perhaps even elections, but every institution begins to vibrate with survival anxiety. Politics narrows toward allocation. Allocation narrows toward legitimacy. Legitimacy narrows toward force or myth. The vessel is still moving, but its civic spirit has started to bend around fear. Memory would then become both burden and battlefield. In the early generations, people still remember abundance, or at least the stories of those who did. They remember that the ship once had broader menus, stronger reserves, more stable lights, more flexible labor, more confidence in repair. Later generations inherit only fragments. The decline becomes normal for those who have never known anything else. A reduced life can therefore feel ordinary to the young and catastrophic to the old at the same time. This difference in memory can fracture a civilization. Elders may appear melodramatic to the young because they speak of losses the young have never inhabited. The young may seem morally weakened to the old because they adapt too easily to diminished standards. Archives may preserve the records of a richer past, but records do not settle the emotional argument. A people can know intellectually that their ship was once healthier and still fail to agree on what that fact means now. In this way, breakdown is not only the loss of capacity, it is the fragmentation of historical scale. One generation experiences crisis, the next experiences routine. The ship survives by teaching adaptation, but adaptation itself can become dangerous when it makes decline feel like destiny rather than damage. Children born into that world would carry the heaviest philosophical burden. They did not choose the voyage, and they certainly did not choose the failing condition of the vessel. Yet they would inherit both. Their schools might teach them about the founding mission, about the destination, about the beauty of endurance, about the duty to preserve what remains. But children are not abstract citizens. They grow through the texture of what they actually see. If what they see is rationing, fear around the water system, sectors sealed for salvage, and adults who speak constantly of maintenance, then their idea of civilization itself may become defined by managed deterioration. That could produce many outcomes. Some may become severe and disciplined, proud of surviving under shrinking margins. Some may grow resentful, feeling condemned to inherit the failures of ancestors they never met. Some may turn the mission into religion because only transcendence can make enough sense of prolonged hardship. Others may become dangerously cynical and ask whether the destination still matters at all if the ship must increasingly consume itself just to continue. This is where existential danger enters with full force. A generation ship can survive technical strain for long periods. It is less clear that it can survive the erosion of consent across many generations if daily life begins to feel like an imposed conservation regime rather than a meaningful future. Once children begin asking not only how the ship works, but why it still deserves their obedience, breakdown reaches its deepest register. Religion, myth, and ritual would likely thicken in such an atmosphere. This is not because enclosed societies become irrational by necessity, but because prolonged uncertainty seeks language larger than maintenance logs. If the ship begins to fail slowly, people will need ways to interpret suffering that are not purely technical. Some may sacralize the founders. Some may speak of the vessel as a covenant under trial. Some may treat specific sectors, machines, or archives with liturgical reverence because they hold the means of survival. Others may become apocalyptic, convinced that the ship's decline proves the mission was hubris from the beginning. Ritual could help hold the society together. Shared mourning for sealed agricultural decks, rites of gratitude before communal meals, commemorations for lost technicians, ceremonies marking restored systems, all these may help transform mechanical fragility into a narrative the population can live inside. Yet myth can also distort reality. Once people begin confusing moral purity with engineering adequacy, or sacred inheritance with actual repair competence, the ship grows more vulnerable even while feeling spiritually fortified. This ambiguity is what makes breakdown so haunting. A failing generation ship may become more ceremonial as it becomes less materially secure. Its prayers become stronger while its pumps become older. Its language of destiny grows richer while its reserves grow thinner. Some of the most moving forms of collective dignity may emerge precisely when the objective situation is worsening. Beauty and danger would no longer be opposites. They would become companions. Automation would not save the ship from this moral complexity. Indeed, it might deepen it. A vessel built for centuries would rely heavily on autonomous systems, predictive maintenance, environmental regulation, diagnostic software, and perhaps machine learning processes sophisticated enough to preserve continuity across generations. In healthy times, that automation would feel like wisdom embedded in the architecture. In failing times, it may begin to feel like an opaque authority that everyone depends on and fewer people truly understand. If software drifts, if sensor networks age, if diagnostic systems begin generating contradictory interpretations, or if key automation stacks rely on hardware that is itself no longer fully replaceable, then the population may find itself in a dangerous relationship with inherited machinery. The ship keeps working partly because machines still know how to keep it working, but fewer human beings can confidently judge whether the machines remain right. This can breed passivity. It can also breed paranoia. Both are fatal in different ways. A small technical misreading from an automated balancing system could reroute water incorrectly, overwork a power node, or misclassify a biological problem in agriculture. At first, humans may trust the system because it has earned that trust over generations. Later, after enough ambiguous failures, they may cease trusting it just when careful partnership with automation becomes most necessary. The ship then suffers a second breakdown layered atop the first, a breakdown in the relationship between human judgment and inherited machine authority. Labor itself would begin to change under these conditions, and that change could wound the civilization almost as deeply as any failing reactor. In a healthy ship, difficult maintenance work may still be honored, but it is balanced by other forms of life: study, art, leisure, scientific curiosity, family time, civic ritual, and the sense that survival labor serves a horizon larger than itself. In a failing ship, maintenance expands until it begins to consume the emotional and temporal oxygen of everything else. More citizens are redirected toward repair, salvage, sanitation, filtration, inspection, food control, and emergency logistics. Fewer remain free to become historians, musicians, speculative thinkers, experimental scientists, or builders of beauty. This is how a civilization becomes functionally poorer before it becomes materially desperate. Work narrows. Specialization hardens. More children are encouraged quietly or openly toward technical disciplines because the ship cannot afford intellectual luxury anymore. The old breadth of culture begins to look indulgent beside the daily arithmetic of keeping air clean and pumps alive. Yet that narrowing carries its own hidden cost. A society that trains only for continuity may preserve continuity for a time while losing the imaginative range required to renew itself. It can keep the old machine running without producing enough new thought to rescue it from cumulative decline. Over generations, this may produce a recognizable class divide even if the culture refuses to name it. Those closest to the core systems become politically central. Those engaged in food, water, atmosphere, and hull work become indispensable. People in less directly survival-linked roles may be tolerated only insofar as morale still requires them. Resentment can grow from both sides. The essential workers may feel unseen until crisis. The non-essential may feel perpetually accused of softness. In deep space, even the dignity of labor acquires a sharper edge, because the society knows that some forms of work stand only one mechanical step away from death. Repair outside the hull would likely become one of the most feared duties on the ship. Internal maintenance is already severe enough when air remains breathable and walls remain thick between flesh and vacuum. Exterior work introduces another order of exposure: micrometeoroid damage, radiation, thermal stress, sensor replacement, shielding degradation, antenna correction, hull patching, and structural inspection may all require citizens to step into the one environment the whole ship exists to keep out. If the vessel is aging, these tasks become more frequent, not less. This could produce a culture in which extravehicular crews occupy an almost legendary place in public imagination. They leave the world in order to preserve it. Their work is technical, but its emotional meaning is older than engineering. It resembles the labor of lighthouse keepers, deep miners, bomb disposal teams, and sailors climbing masts in storms, except with nowhere truly safe nearby. A damaged exterior sensor may sound trivial to the population until someone must cross the hull's exposed geometry to reach it, tethered to a civilization that knows one failed seal or one overlooked fragment can turn duty into memorial. The more often these repairs are needed, the more the ship begins to understand its own vulnerability somatically. The problem is no longer buried in reports. Citizens know that someone from their district or family is walking the outside because the ship's body is not holding perfectly anymore. Exterior repair would therefore transform abstract systems' decline into shared civic dread. Each mission outside becomes a reminder that the vessel is no longer coasting on the strength of its founding design. It is surviving by asking human beings to meet its decay directly. Rationing would also become more complicated than simple arithmetic. A population under visible decline does not only need calories, liters, or watts allocated fairly. It needs a story about why the allocation is fair, who decides it, what exceptions exist, and whether the burden is truly shared. This is where technical scarcity becomes moral theater. A ship may calculate distribution perfectly and still fail politically if the citizens experiencing that distribution no longer believe the calculation belongs to a just order. One sector may receive more stable climate control because it houses critical infants. Another may receive higher protein allocation because it performs heavy repair labor. A medical ward may consume more power than a school. Agricultural teams may retain water privileges that ordinary households lose. Every one of these choices can be rational. Rationality does not dissolve resentment. A population living under persistent rationing develops sharp ears for hierarchy. It begins to hear favoritism in tone, ideology in procedure, hidden class assumptions in technical language. That is why black markets, quiet corruption, and favors exchanged through maintenance access could become especially dangerous. In a closed world, illicit privilege does not merely violate law, it distorts survival itself. A stolen filter cartridge, a diverted pharmaceutical stock, a hidden reserve of cleaner water, or unauthorized access to fresh agricultural produce can become symbolically immense. People can endure scarcity more readily than they can endure the suspicion that scarcity is being unevenly softened for the well-connected. In this way, even small acts of private advantage can poison collective morale more effectively than overt repression. Education under these conditions would face a terrible temptation to become increasingly instrumental. Schools on a failing generation ship would still be expected to pass on literacy, mathematics, engineering basics, civic history, system awareness, and perhaps the original purpose of the mission. But the more the crisis deepens, the more educational breadth may look extravagant. Music, philosophy, speculative science, literature, and free intellectual wandering can begin to seem like luxuries purchased at the cost of needed technical discipline. This is one of the quiet tragedies of decline. A civilization under pressure often starts by sacrificing what seems least immediately necessary. Yet what seems least necessary may turn out to be what kept the society spiritually elastic enough to remain worth saving. If children are trained only to inherit failing infrastructure, they may become competent custodians and inwardly diminished heirs. They will know the pressure ranges for pumps, the sterilization cycles for food chambers, the emergency protocols for water loss, but they may know less and less about why human beings ever thought it noble to cross the dark in the first place. A ship that wants to survive more than a few diminished generations must therefore defend unnecessary knowledge with unusual courage. Poetry may not patch a reservoir, but a people without poetry may lose the language required to distinguish survival from mere continuation. History may not purify air, but a people without history may no longer recognize the difference between adaptation and surrender. The breakdown of a generation ship is thus partly the breakdown of educational confidence. What shall be taught when there is no longer enough time to teach everything? The answer shapes not only labor efficiency, but the soul of the future. There is also the danger of spatial shrinkage. A healthy ship can distribute population, labor, ritual, and private life across many functioning sectors. A failing ship begins to contract. Agricultural bays are sealed after blight. Recreation decks are shut down to save power. Residential rings are consolidated to simplify atmosphere management. Old corridors are abandoned because lighting them is no longer worth the energy. Sections once associated with festivals, research, archives, or public beauty become ghost districts behind locked doors. That contraction is more than practical. It changes the psychological map by which a population understands its world. Citizens begin to live in a smaller vessel than the one their grandparents knew, even if the hull has not physically changed. Rumors gather in sealed sectors. Children invent legends about dim decks no one visits anymore. Salvage teams move through old neighborhoods, stripping useful components from spaces once designed for laughter, study, or celebration. The ship becomes haunted not by supernatural force, but by architecture that remembers a broader life than the present one can sustain. This is a profound form of civilizational injury because cities are partly made of accessible memory. When spaces vanish, the memory attached to them begins to vanish too. A public square sealed for power reasons removes not only square meters from operation, but the habits, arguments, romances, and ceremonies once sheltered there. Deep space failure, therefore, does not only ration matter. It erases geography from the social body. People survive, but in a world growing steadily more cramped in both function and meaning. Under enough pressure, even truth itself can become unstable. A command structure facing slow breakdown may feel that full transparency will produce panic, sabotage, fatalism, or self-fulfilling disorder. Citizens facing strange symptoms, altered rations, sealed sectors, and harder working conditions may begin to suspect that they are not being told enough. In such a setting, misinformation does not need to be malicious to become lethal. It can arise from protective secrecy, partial data, scientific disagreement, wounded pride, or the ordinary human wish to avoid being the one who announces that the ship is worse off than yesterday. This is one of the ugliest moments in any enclosed society, the point at which no one is sure whether optimism is courage, delusion, or policy. Engineers may genuinely disagree about the severity of atmospheric drift. Medical officers may argue over whether contaminant-related symptoms are rising or merely being reported more frequently. Political leaders may use uncertainty as shelter for inaction. Citizens may fill interpretive gaps with rumor because rumor at least has emotional shape. Once truth becomes difficult to trust, repair becomes harder even if the tools remain available. Technical systems rely on accurate reporting, accurate diagnosis, and public compliance. A society that no longer trusts its own measurements begins to move like a wounded organism that has lost confidence in pain signals. It may overreact in one place and underreact in another. The ship then suffers not only from failing hardware, but from epistemic fatigue, the exhaustion of not knowing which reality is authoritative anymore. Reproduction would become more difficult under breakdown conditions, not only biologically but morally. A healthy generation ship can imagine birth as continuity, as proof that the voyage remains larger than the founding crew and capable of carrying real human life rather than mere suspended survival. A failing ship begins to see birth through a darker lens. Every child requires air, water, nutrition, medical care, education, physical space, and decades of social investment. Under abundance, that truth feels like promise. Under contraction, it can begin to feel like pressure. This does not mean the population would simply stop having children. On the contrary, many may cling to birth more fiercely because birth is the clearest refusal of despair available to a civilization under stress. Yet precisely for that reason, reproduction could become politically charged. Authorities might begin to monitor pregnancies more closely, not out of cruelty at first, but out of systems anxiety. Medical teams may quietly advise against certain births because nutrition is slipping or pharmaceuticals are less reliable. Citizens may begin judging one another's family choices through the lens of public scarcity. The intimate sphere becomes entangled with infrastructure. That is where the horror deepens. A ship already strained by failing water loops and narrowing food security may find itself unable to decide whether children represent hope, burden, obligation, or all three together. In one district, births may be celebrated as proof that the future still exists. In another, they may provoke whispered resentment because everyone knows the reserves are thinner than the official numbers suggest. This would place unbearable emotional weight on ordinary love. Parenthood would no longer belong only to family and affection. It would become one of the places where the ship's survival arithmetic enters the human heart most painfully. The economy of recycling would also grow harsher with each stage of decline. A functioning generation ship already depends on circulation rather than disappearance. Materials return, are sterilized, reprocessed, broken down, fabricated anew, or diverted into secondary uses. When the vessel is healthy, this can feel elegant, almost beautiful, like proof that civilization has learned not to waste what it cannot replace. Under breakdown conditions, the same elegance begins to harden into compulsion. Nothing can be thrown away because too much has already become irreplaceable. Every object acquires a longer and more burdensome afterlife. This could transform daily culture in subtle and exhausting ways. Clothing would be patched repeatedly. Furniture might be disassembled for thermal panels. Personal belongings could become morally controversial if they occupy mass and space without obvious utility. Even sentimental objects may need to justify themselves. Children might inherit toys rebuilt from old instruments. Ceremonial spaces may be stripped for wiring. Kitchens may return scrap so thoroughly to the system that eating begins to feel inseparable from accounting. The ship would still contain domestic life, but domestic life would be watched by the logic of salvage. There is something psychologically draining in that level of material intimacy. On Earth, people can maintain illusions about waste because they live in a world large enough to hide its own stomach. A failing ship cannot. It must digest everything. To survive, it may become a civilization in which citizens are trained from youth to see objects not as finished possessions, but as temporary states in the larger metabolism of the vessel. That discipline might preserve life. It could also slowly thin the sense of ease that once made life feel rich. People would not only live in a shrinking world, they would handle that shrinkage every day in the objects around them. Trust between generations may eventually become one of the most fragile systems aboard. The old remember more comfort, stronger reserves, broader menus, brighter infirmaries, more confident engineers, more open sectors. The young inherit a world already adjusted to reduction. Each can misread the other. Elders may sound like mourners reciting losses that no longer feel real to people born inside scarcity. The young may sound complacent or even morally stunted to those who still remember what the ship was built to be. This tension can become political very quickly. It may influence school curricula, work expectations, religious language, and public memory. Older citizens may insist that the decline is reversible if only discipline and courage return. Younger citizens may suspect that this is nostalgia disguised as strategy. One side talks about restoration, the other talks about realism. Neither may be wholly wrong. A civilization in decline often suffers because it cannot tell the difference between memory that clarifies and memory that imprisons. On a generation ship, the problem becomes more dangerous because there is nowhere else to take the argument. The dispute remains inside the same walls, shaping labor assignments, reproductive ethics, risk tolerance, and attitudes toward the destination itself. Some of the young may ask whether preserving the original mission is worth the cost if the ship has already become a harder and narrower place than the founders imagined. Some of the old may interpret that question as betrayal. Once a society begins to split over whether its suffering still has meaning, the breakdown has moved beyond machinery and into the inheritance of purpose. Then there is the fear of irreversible threshold. Many technical failures can be tolerated for a while precisely because people assume there is still time to recover. A water loop can be purified next month. A failing agricultural sector can be stabilized after the next maintenance cycle. A degrading reactor can be load balanced until deeper repair becomes possible. But every closed system has a point beyond which delay stops being prudent and becomes fatal. The terror aboard a generation ship is that no one may know with confidence where that point truly lies until it has already been crossed. This uncertainty would haunt every decision. Shut down one more recreational deck to preserve energy, or keep morale alive a little longer. Divert more water to agriculture, or preserve medical sterility reserves. Allow one failing sector to limp on for another year, or strip it now for parts and admit that part of the ship is lost. The cruelest choices are not between clear good and clear evil. They are between competing futures, each of which may collapse for different reasons. A command structure facing that burden can become grimly rational, timidly hesitant, or violently reactive. All three responses are dangerous. What makes threshold fear so corrosive is that it teaches people to hear catastrophe in ordinary language. Routine maintenance updates begin to sound like omens. A new ration guideline feels like the first page of a funeral speech. Every minor systems report is interpreted as possible evidence that the ship has entered its final manageable year without anyone daring to say so. The civilization continues working, teaching, eating, praying, repairing, and falling in love. But all of it unfolds under the growing suspicion that one loop, one pump cluster, one seal chain, one agricultural chamber may be closer to final failure than yesterday. In deep space, existential dread is not always loud. Sometimes it arrives as the inability to trust that tomorrow remains structurally similar to today. All of this leads to the most dreadful possibility of deep space failure. The ship survives, but in a diminished form that no longer justifies the original dream. It does not explode. It does not fall silent. It reaches neither glorious collapse nor glorious rescue. It simply grows narrower. Fewer gardens, fewer freedoms, fewer repairs done beautifully, less art, less privacy, less confidence, more sectors sealed, more labor devoted to basic continuity, more reverence for salvage, more children raised inside a civilization that has learned to survive by shrinking. From the outside, if any outside observer still mattered, the mission might still count as successful in the most minimal sense. The ship continues. Human life persists. The line toward another star remains unbroken. Yet internally, the meaning of that success may have curdled. A society can remain technically alive while losing the very conditions that once made its endurance noble. This is what the fantasy of dramatic destruction often hides. Sometimes the worst fate is not death. It is prolonged reduction. A generation ship breaking down in deep space would therefore reveal a brutal truth about closed worlds. In such places, a small failure is never just small for long. Air, water, food, power, replacement parts, medicine, legitimacy, memory, and hope are all tied together. When one weakens, the others do not remain innocent bystanders. They begin quietly and then unmistakably to move. That is why deep space is so unforgiving. It is not merely empty. It is a place where every weakness remains inside the walls until the whole civilization learns its name.